Today we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. The first story involves a father and his 15-year-old son who dropped straight past a warning sign on Christmas morning and kept going down until the depth itself turned their own bodies against them. The second is colder and quieter, where a single dropped bag pulled two college students into a freezing underground waterfall they could not climb back out of. As always, viewer discretion is advised. It was the morning of December 25th, 2013, in Weeki Wachee, Florida. Most families in Hernando County were still in their pajamas, unwrapping presents. Darren Spivey, 35 years old, had a different kind of Christmas planned. He was a certified open water diver, comfortable in the ocean, confident in his gear. His son, Dylan Sanchez, was 15, a student at Hernando High in ROTC, the kind of kid who told people he wanted to be a Navy SEAL one day. Dylan had no diving certification of any kind, none, but he had gotten brand new scuba equipment for Christmas, and he and his father wanted to try it out. So they drove to a quiet pond in the Chassahowitzka Wildlife Management Area, a place called Eagle's Nest. You need to understand what Eagle's Nest actually is, because from the surface, it lies to you. It looks like an ordinary little pond in the woods. Brown water, a few logs, nothing dramatic. But that pond is the mouth of one of the most dangerous underwater cave systems on the planet. Divers call it the Mount Everest of cave diving. Below the surface, a narrow shaft drops into a vast black chamber known as the Ballroom, sitting around 70 feet down. And from there, the cave keeps going, plunging past 300 feet into total darkness. The water stays around 72 degrees year-round, and at depth, there is no light at all. No natural way back up, except the way you came. At the water's edge, the state had bolted up a sign. It read that cave diving in this area was extremely dangerous, even life-threatening, and warned that no one should dive unless they were a certified cave diver. For years, the site was also marked with the now famous image of the Grim Reaper. The warnings could not have been clearer. A hunter in the area saw the two of them around 11:30 that morning, suiting up at the water. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. They went down the main shaft, together, father and son, dropping into the dark. And here is where the absence of training becomes everything. Cave divers run a continuous guideline back to the exit so they can find their way out blind. They carefully match their breathing gas to their depth, because ordinary air becomes a problem the deeper you go. Darren and Dylan had none of that. No line work, no gas matching, no cave training between the two of them. Just standard air in their tanks and the open mouth of the shaft below them. And they kept descending, past the Ballroom, past 100 feet, past 200 feet. Investigators would later determine they reached a depth of 233 feet, breathing nothing but air. A recovery diver who knew that cave intimately said afterward that no one should be down there on air past about 218 feet, and that they should have been breathing a specialized trimix instead. The pair had blown straight through that ceiling. Let me paint you the picture of what that depth does to a person. At 233 feet, the nitrogen in ordinary air starts to act like a drug. They call it nitrogen narcosis, and it works on your mind like several strong drinks all at once. Your judgment softens, your reactions slow. Simple problems start to feel far away. At that same depth, the air in your tank gets used up many times faster than it does near the surface, so your supply is draining at a rate you have never experienced, and probably do not even register, because the narcosis is dulling the part of your brain that should be screaming at you. Can you imagine that? Father and son, hundreds of feet down in the black, slowly losing the ability to understand that they were in trouble, while the one thing keeping them alive hissed out of their tanks faster and faster. And then the air ran low. This is the moment everything turned. Darren's tank is going empty. His son's tank is going empty. They are deeper than trained professionals are willing to go, in the dark, with the narcosis pressing on their thoughts like a hand. Evidence recovered later suggested that Darren tried to save his boy. Investigators believed the father handed off his own emergency regulator so his son could breathe, and that Dylan then made a desperate swim upward, toward the exit, toward the light that was hundreds of feet above him. He climbed and climbed through the water. He made it a long way, but not far enough. Up on the surface, the day was getting dark, and they had not come home. Darren's fiancée, Holly King, started calling friends, asking if she should be worried. When she could not reach him, she called the Hernando County Sheriff's Office. Deputies reached that quiet little pond in the dark of Christmas night, with nothing to go on but a hunter's memory of 2 divers suiting up that morning. This was no longer a rescue, it was a recovery. At 8:30 that night, a certified recovery diver named Eric Deister went down into the cave. He found Dylan first, at 67 feet, near the upper chamber. The boy had made it back almost to the ballroom before he was overcome. Deister then brought in 2 more divers, Robert Brooks and Matthew Vinzant, and together, the 3 of them located Darren much deeper, at 127 feet. Vinzant later said he had gone cave diving with his own father at 15 years old. He understood, in a way that must have been unbearable, exactly what he was looking at. Here is the detail that stays with you. Next to Darren's body, the divers found 2 full emergency tanks, more than 3,000 pounds of pressure each, a usable breathing mix, an entire lifeline. One of the tanks had even been unclipped, but the regulator was never pulled, never turned on. Whether the narcosis stole the thought from him, or whether he gave everything to his son and had nothing left for himself, no one can say for certain. The medical examiner took 4 months to complete the investigation and ruled both deaths an accidental drowning. The equipment was never the thing that killed them. They had air they never breathed and a backup they never opened. What killed them was the depth and the simple fact that neither of them had been trained to survive it. The cave gave them every warning, in writing, at the water's edge, and they swam past it on Christmas morning. This next story trades the warm, dark water of Florida for something far colder, and it shows how fast a small mistake becomes a fatal one underground. It was Saturday, February 12th, 2011, on Pigeon Mountain in Walker County, Georgia. A group of 10 University of Florida students from Gainesville drove up into the Appalachian foothills to explore a place called Ellison's Cave. Among them were Grant Lockenbach, 20 years old, from DeLand, Florida, and Michael Peary, 18, from Ocoee. The whole group were friends, out for a weekend adventure. By the official evaluation that came afterward, none of them had real caving experience. Ellison's Cave is not a place for beginners. It is one of the deepest caves in the United States, with a vertical extent of over 1,000 feet and more than 12 miles of mapped passage carved through limestone, all of it managed by the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. It is famous among serious cavers for 2 enormous vertical drops, Fantastic Pit at 586 feet, an Incredible Pit at 440. These are the kinds of pits you fall the length of a skyscraper into. Long before the students arrived, the cave had already killed. In 1999, an experienced caver became tangled on a parallel rope in the spray of a waterfall in Incredible Pit and died there, suspended, of hypothermia and suspension trauma. The cave had a documented history of doing exactly the thing it was about to do again. The students made their way to a vertical drop called the warm-up pit, a sheer 125-foot descent, the kind of pit cavers often tackle first. And then, a small, ordinary thing went wrong. A bag of gear slipped and fell, tumbling down into the dark of the pit, all the way to the bottom. Someone had to go get it. Grant Lockenbach rigged a single rope technique line, clipped in, and began to rappel down to retrieve it. What the group could not fully appreciate was where that rope hung. The line ran straight down through the path of a freezing, high-volume waterfall pouring through the pit. Roughly 100 feet down, Lockenbach became tangled in his own rigging, and the freezing water came down on top of him, and it did not stop. Let me tell you what that water does to a body. It is not the gentle cold of a swimming pool. It is a relentless torrent at cave temperature, hammering his head and shoulders, soaking through his clothing in seconds, pulling the heat out of his core far faster than his body could ever make it. This is hypothermia in its most aggressive form. First, the violent shivering, then the clumsiness, fingers that will not obey, the inability to work the very rope that has him trapped. There is a second killer here too, one that catches people who hang motionless in a harness for too long. They call it suspension trauma. The harness compresses the veins in the legs, blood pools, and the body begins to fail, even though nothing is technically crushing it. Grant was caught in both at once, tangled, freezing, and hanging, with the roar of the waterfall so loud that it swallowed every word he tried to shout up to his friends. 18-year-old Michael Peary heard him, and he did not hesitate. He put on a harness, clipped onto a second line, and went down into the same pit to save his friend. He is descending toward the roar. The water is deafening. He cannot hear Grant clearly, and Grant cannot hear him. He reaches the freezing column, and the same torrent that trapped his friend now pours over him. His own fingers begin to go numb. His own warmth bleeds out into the dark. He cannot free Grant. He cannot free himself. And the two of them are now hanging together in the same freezing waterfall, 100 feet down, with no way to climb and no way for their friends above to reach them. Within minutes, the cold took their consciousness. Both young men lost the ability to move, then the ability to stay awake, and they passed away suspended on their ropes in the dark, before anyone could get to them. The rest of the group raised the alarm, but help was a long way off, and the pit was a brutal place to work. It took rescuers more than 8 hours to recover the two bodies from a depth of about 100 feet. The autopsies confirmed what the sheriff already suspected. Both had died of hypothermia, trapped in the spray of the waterfall. The post-accident evaluation reached a conclusion that is hard to read. The deaths were judged completely avoidable. It came down to inexperience, to rappelling a rope rigged straight through a freezing waterfall, and to going down to help without the training to self-rescue from that exact situation. A dropped bag was the entire reason any of it began. The bag could have stayed at the bottom of the pit forever and harmed no one. What turned a piece of lost gear into 2 funerals was a young man going into a waterfall he did not have the skills to come back out of, and a younger man who loved him enough to follow.